The lion lay motionless in the dirt, his massive body rising and falling with slow, labored breaths. His golden coat, once sleek and powerful, was now dull and matted with blood. A steel trap clamped mercilessly around his hind leg, its jagged edges biting deep into his flesh. The poachers who had set the trap were long gone. They had taken what they wanted, his pride, the females, the cubs, all stolen to be sold into the black market. But this lion, the mighty protector, had fought back, and for that they had left him behind to die alone. For days he had struggled, his once mighty roars reduced to low, pained growls. The sun scorched his skin during the day, and the cold night stole what little strength he had left. Flies buzzed around his wounds, and his body grew weaker with every passing hour. But he refused to give up. Somewhere, deep inside, a fire still burned. He had been the leader of his pride, the guardian of his land. He couldn't let it end like this. And then, just as darkness began to creep into his vision, he heard something. Footsteps. At first, his instinct screamed danger. Another predator? More poachers? His body tensed, but he was too weak to move. Then, a voice, soft, careful. Oh my God, he's still alive. A human. But this time, not one that meant harm. A group of rescuers had been patrolling the reserve, tracking poachers when they had stumbled upon the site. Their leader, a woman named Sarah, knelt cautiously beside the lion, her heart breaking at the sight before her. She had seen many injured animals in her time, but this was different. This wasn't just an animal. This was a king brought to his knees. "Stay with us, big guy," she whispered, reaching out a gloved hand. The lion barely twitched, his golden eyes dull with exhaustion. Her team moved quickly, setting up a perimeter and preparing sedatives to safely remove the trap. Every second counted. If infection had set in, if his body had gone too long without water. Sarah clenched her jaw. Number. We're not losing him. The lion let out a weak exhale as the tranquilizer took effect. As his body went still, Sarah and her team worked fast, removing the brutal trap and disinfecting the deep wounds. But saving his life was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. Would he trust them? Would he fight to survive? And most importantly, could they help him find his way home? As Sarah looked at the wounded lion, she made a silent promise. "You're not alone anymore." And for the first time in days, the great lion wasn't fighting alone. The lion slept deeply as the tranquilizer did its work, his massive chest rising and falling in steady but weak breaths. Sarah and her team worked quickly, knowing that every second counted. They had seen the horrors of poaching before, but something about this lion, the sheer strength he must have had to survive this long, made this rescue feel even more urgent. "His leg is in bad shape," muttered Jacob, the team's veterinarian, as he examined the raw, bloodied wound left by the trap. "If we had found him any later—" He didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what would have happened. Sarah's jaw tightened. "We didn't find him too late. We're going to save him." Her team moved swiftly, cleaning the wound and wrapping it carefully. The lion barely flinched. His body was too exhausted, too drained to resist. After securing a makeshift stretcher beneath him, they carefully lifted him onto the back of their rescue vehicle. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. His muscles, though weakened, were still powerful, a testament to the warrior he once was. Sarah ran a hand over his mane. "We'll get you back, big guy," she whispered. The drive back to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was tense. Every bump in the road made Sarah's heart lurch. The lion remained unconscious, but his breathing was slow and steady. When they finally arrived, the team wasted no time. Jacob worked on stitching the deeper wounds while another rescuer started him on IV fluids. They kept his enclosure dim and quiet, giving him the peace he needed to heal. Hours passed. The team took turns watching over him, barely daring to leave his side. Then, as the sun dipped low in the sky, the lion stirred. Sarah sat up straight. "He's waking up." Slowly, the lion's golden eyes flickered open. For a moment he seemed disoriented, his ears twitching as he took in his new surroundings. Then, as instinct kicked in, a deep growl rumbled from his throat. "Easy, big guy," Jacob murmured. "You're safe." But the lion didn't know that yet. He tried to move, but his injured leg trembled beneath him. Pain flashed across his face, and his growl faded into a soft, exhausted exhale. Sarah's heart ached. He didn't understand they were trying to help. All he knew was that he was somewhere unfamiliar, weak and alone. But he wasn't alone anymore. Sarah knelt just outside his enclosure, her voice calm, steady. "You're not a prisoner here. We're going to help you heal. You fought long enough by yourself. Let us fight for you now." The lion's eyes locked onto hers. For a long, still moment, neither of them moved. Then, just barely, his ears relaxed. And Sarah knew he was giving them a chance. The days that followed were filled with slow, careful progress. The lion, now named Taji, meaning crown in Swahili, was still wary of the humans tending to him. He never lashed out, never showed aggression, but his golden eyes watched their every move with quiet mistrust. Sarah understood. This was a creature who had been betrayed by humans, first by poachers who had stolen his pride, then by the merciless trap that had nearly ended his life. Why would he trust them now? But Sarah also knew one thing for sure. Taji was a fighter. Even in his weakest moments, he refused to give in. When they brought food, he wouldn't eat until the humans had backed away. When he needed treatment for his wounds, he tolerated it, but only with a low, warning growl rumbling in his throat. Yet, with every passing day, he grew stronger. His muscles, once weakened by starvation and pain, slowly regained their power. His coat, once dull and matted, began to shine again, and most importantly, the fire in his eyes returned. Still, there was something missing. Taji searched for something. Every time he was awake, his head would turn toward the open fields beyond his enclosure. His ears twitched at the distant sounds of the wild. His nose lifted to catch scents carried by the wind. Sarah knew what it was. He was looking for his pride. One afternoon, as she sat near his enclosure, she spoke softly. "They took your family from you, but I promise we're going to help you get back where you belong." Taji's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Sarah sighed. Does he even believe that's possible anymore? That night, the team gathered around their research station, reviewing footage from nearby wildlife cameras. They had been monitoring lion activity across the region, hoping to find any sign of Taji's missing pride. And then, there, Jacob pointed at the screen, his voice urgent. Sarah leaned in. The grainy footage showed a group of lionesses with cubs moving through the brush. They were skittish, their movements cautious. They had no alpha male with them. "They're hiding," Sarah whispered. Taji's pride was still out there. A mix of emotions swelled in her chest. Relief, excitement, but also frustration. These lions were vulnerable without their leader. If poachers found them again... She clenched her fists. We won't let that happen. She turned to her team, determination burning in her eyes. Taji isn't just some rescue case. He's a king without a kingdom. And if we want to give him a real chance at survival, we need to reunite him with his family. Jacob nodded. Then we better figure out how to get him home. Outside, under the moonlit sky, Taji sat in his enclosure, staring into the distance. He didn't know it yet, but the fight for his future had just begun. The next challenge was clear, getting Taji home. But it wouldn't be easy. Reintroducing a lion to the wild wasn't as simple as opening a gate and letting him go. His pride had been without him for weeks. If too much time had passed, the lionesses might have moved on, accepting their fate as a leaderless group. Worse, another male might have taken his place. And yet, Taji still searched for them. Each day, as his strength returned, he would stand at the edge of his enclosure, staring toward the open savanna. His ears perked at distant roars, his nose lifted to the wind, as if trying to catch a familiar scent. He knew they were out there. Sarah watched him closely, studying his movements. It was clear he wasn't meant to stay here. He belonged in the wild. But they had to be smart about this. "Let's start by taking him to a soft release site," Jacob suggested. "Somewhere close to where his pride was last seen, but with controlled boundaries. That way, we can see how he reacts." Sarah nodded. "If he shows signs of recognizing the area, we'll take the next step." A week later, the plan was set. Moving a fully grown lion was no small task. First, they sedated him, just enough to keep him calm. Then, carefully, they transported him in a reinforced wildlife transport truck, driving deep into the protected reserve where his pride had last been spotted. The release site was a vast, open space enclosed by a temporary boundary. It was wild enough to feel like home, but secure enough to observe him before taking the final step. As the sedative wore off, Taji stirred, his eyes blinking open. At first, he was groggy, confused, but then his ears twitched, his nose flared, and then his head snapped up. Something in the air had changed. Sarah barely breathed as she watched him rise to his feet, his powerful muscles stretched, his golden mane catching the wind. And then a sound carried through the vast plains, a distant roar. Taji went still. Sarah's heart pounded. It was faint but unmistakable. A lioness's call. Taji's body tensed, his ears pinned forward, his eyes locked on the horizon. And then, before anyone could stop him, he roared back. The deep, thunderous sound shook the very ground beneath them. It was a call of power, of identity, of belonging. And somewhere out there his pride heard him. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "It's working," she whispered. Taji was no longer just a rescued lion. He was a king calling his family home. Now, all they had to do was wait. Would his pride answer? The air was thick with tension. Taji stood tall, his golden mane rippling in the wind, his muscles taut with anticipation. His roar echoed across the plains, a sound that demanded an answer. Then silence. Sarah held her breath, scanning the horizon. The research team stood frozen, their equipment forgotten in their hands. They all knew this was the moment that would decide everything. Would his pride remember him? Taji's ears twitched, his body still as a statue. Then, faint but clear, a second roar rang out. Sarah's heart leaped. It was closer this time. Taji turned sharply toward the sound, his nostrils flaring. His tail flicked with nervous energy, but his eyes burned with something deeper. Recognition. Sarah exchanged a glance with Jacob. "That's them," she whispered. "They're coming." The reunion begins. Minutes passed like hours. Then, at the farthest edge of the grasslands, movement. A lioness emerged from the tall grass. She was lean but strong, her golden coat blending perfectly into the landscape. Behind her, two more followed, moving with cautious but deliberate steps. And then, two small cubs, barely old enough to keep up, stumbled into view. Sarah's breath hitched. His cubs. Taji took a slow step forward, then another. The lionesses paused, their ears flicking, their eyes wary. Then the lead lioness, the one Sarah suspected had been Taji's mate, let out a deep, throaty growl. Not of aggression, of recognition. Taji let out a short, rumbling chuff in response. His massive frame moved with slow, careful purpose, lowering his head slightly, not in submission, but in reassurance. The lead lioness hesitated for only a second before closing the distance. She brushed against him, rubbing her head along his thick mane. The second lioness did the same. The cubs, at first unsure, took a few tentative steps forward. Then, one of them let out a tiny, uncertain mew, a soft cub's attempt at a roar. Taji turned to them, lowered his head, and let out a deep, gentle purr. It was all the reassurance they needed. With excited squeaks, the cubs pounced onto his front paws, climbing up his legs like he was their own personal mountain. Sarah's vision blurred. She swallowed the lump in her throat, barely able to believe what she was seeing. "This is incredible," Jacob murmured. Sarah could only nod. It had worked. Taji wasn't just accepted, he was home. He had fought for his family, survived impossible odds, and now, against everything, he was back where he belonged. And as the reunited pride moved into the grasslands together, disappearing into the wild, Sarah knew she had witnessed something extraordinary. But their work wasn't done yet. Now, they had to make sure this family stayed safe. Taji and his pride disappeared into the tall grass, their golden coats blending perfectly into the wild. But Sarah and her team didn't pack up and leave. Their mission wasn't over yet. Reuniting Taji with his family had been a miracle, but keeping them safe was the next battle. Poachers were still out there, hunting lions for profit. If they found Taji's pride again, they wouldn't hesitate to finish what they had started. Sarah refused to let that happen. Over the next several weeks, the team worked tirelessly to monitor the pride. They set up hidden cameras and reinforced the reserve's anti-poaching patrols. They also secured funding for more rangers, trained men and women who would dedicate their lives to protecting these lions from illegal hunters. But the most important step, tracking Taji. "We need to know where he is at all times," Jacob said, holding up a lightweight GPS collar. "If anything happens, if poachers come near him, we'll be able to intervene immediately." Collaring a wild lion wasn't easy, but with careful planning, they managed to sedate Taji one last time and fit him with the tracker before releasing him back to his family. Now, no matter where he went, Sarah would know. Weeks passed, and Taji thrived. Sarah watched with pride as he took back his role as king. He patrolled his territory, roared at the rising sun, and played gently with his cubs, letting them climb all over him before giving them a firm but loving nudge. He was no longer the broken lion they had found trapped and abandoned. He was whole again. Then, one night, an alert came through Sarah's tracker. Poachers had entered the reserve. Sarah's blood ran cold. Not again. Her team mobilized quickly, calling the rangers and rushing to the GPS coordinates. When they arrived, they found footprints near the reserve's border, but no poachers in sight. Instead, they saw Taji. He stood on a rocky outcrop, his powerful frame outlined by the moonlight. His golden eyes were locked on the intruders, who had already turned and fled. "They knew," Jacob whispered. "They saw him and ran." Sarah exhaled shakily. The poachers had expected a weakened, vulnerable pride. Instead, they had found a king defending his home. And Taji wasn't alone anymore. He had his pride, he had his land, and he had a team of humans willing to fight alongside him. As the months passed, Taji's story spread. His survival became a symbol of hope and resilience, inspiring conservation efforts worldwide. More rangers were trained, more laws were passed to protect lions, and more people learned the true cost of poaching. Taji had almost been forgotten, but now he would be remembered forever, because some kings don't need thrones. Some just need the wild. Did this story inspire you? Hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of survival and hope. And tell us, if you could save one animal from extinction, which would it be? Drop your answer in the comments.